lessons didn't stop, obviously. I mean, the parents still wanted their children educated, and they wanted the teachers, the Higdons. So when the weather was fine, lessons took place on the village green. But obviously the weather in England is not always fine. So there was a gentleman called Blind Ambrose Sandy, and he owned a carpenter's shop. And he let them have that for use, and the parents cleaned it up and painted it up and furnished it so that when the children needed somewhere to shelter, they could then go in and have their lessons in the carpenter's shop. Reverend Eland, because Ambrose Sandy owned or rented some glebe land, Reverend Eland turned him out, hoping that then the Higdons would have to leave the carpenter's shop. Well, they did. I mean, poor blind Ambrose Sandy had no income and then had to leave the village. So he, in a way, was turned out by the Reverend Eland because of this glebe land. And that was Reverend Eland's weapon against them. But the Higdons luckily had a little income of their own, and after a couple of years the NUT did chip in and pay a little bit. So they actually rented a shed, and that was on the village green until by this time, of course, money is coming in from the various donations, the unions and so on and so forth. So this shed was used after the carpenter's shop until the strike school that we see today was built. Obviously, because the parents weren't sending the children to the actual recognised council school, they were fined. But the people would go out with collecting tins, and people of Diss and the area around would pay the fines.
There were public meetings held in London. There were coach loads, train loads of people came up to Burston. At one stage there was a meeting with 2,000 people on the green, and money was raised. And so the solidarity was because the group of people who decided there was an injustice, and as a group they could do something about it.
So the magistrates doubled the fines a second time. Still they were paid, and it became, the march to Diss to the magistrates' court became quite a ceremony, and they would have a great time. But this then obviously got into local papers, was taken up by the nationals, favoured by one journalist, a chap called W. Hampson, whose pen name was Casey, and you'll see his name engraved on the strike school. He actually took this up and wrote a little booklet about it and publicised it, and all sorts of people began to come along, and I suppose the one name that everybody will know is Sylvia Pankhurst. And she came to Burston. There was also a Labour MP, Tom Mann.
And the fact that the way had been led by children and younger people this is why it became, the local press, then the national press became very interested. I mean, media in those days wasn't as it is today, so it did take some time, but the national press were very keen on the story.
George Lansbury, and then it spread abroad. And if you look at the strike school, you will see on one of the slabs engraved the name Leo Tolstoy. Now, I have to say that Leo Tolstoy is not the author, it's his son. But they donated money towards support for the Higdons and the building of the strike school. So solidarity grew.
And you see all those plaques there, and you see the people who were touched by that story, by what was happening, that they willingly gave money to have that school built. The lessons we're learning or ought to learn, is that we must be united together. If everybody doesn't pull together, and people particularly in the rural areas need to make sure that they join their appropriate union, because that's the only thing that's going to fight for them.
We're trying to keep the spirit of Burston alive, the passion that they believed at the time for change. Dealing with those sorts of issues that they did in 1914 and the insecurity that workers felt. I mean, these workers were fined for not sending their kids to school. They were fined half a week's wages.
That's what the Higdons believed, that they understood that if working class children could have the same education as those of the big business and bosses, then they could achieve the same things in life as those.
So we've been coming down from Coventry, 350-mile round trip, once a year, just before the rally, to tidy the graves up. And then we encourage people from the trade unions in Coventry to come down, and we do a little ceremony in front of the graves, and we put the flowers on that you can see, Rolls-Royce, Coventry Trades Council, Coventry NUT and so on.
The things that the Higdons did and the local people, especially led by the children, it absolutely demonstrates the power of what people can do as a community, and not being daunted by authority that was put in front of them, the squire and the vicar and the rest of it. They knew they wanted the world to be, and they were determined to shape it that way.
It's so beautiful here, and to actually see that children stood up for their teachers to say, yeah, we want good education and, you know, we want to learn about real life. And that's what actually touched me. And I just wish children nowadays would see that.
And they fought hard for that, for everybody. And certainly, as the previous head teacher at the county school, I was very much aware of the fact I was following in her footsteps, and tried to deliver education in the same way as she did.
Why do we, in 2013, 2014 now coming, why are we still celebrating that wonderful strike? Those children who knew that they were going to lose the teachers who they loved were supported by their parents. Their parents were fined what in those days was a horrible amount of money just to keep those children out on strike. They were being taken to court and fined. But I believe what those parents knew very well, that was almost a last gasp, because if they lost that battle, and I'm getting emotional, if they lost that battle, then their livelihoods was gone and they were back enslaved.